The low growl of motorcycles shattered the usual hum of engines at Crossroads truck stop, the sound cutting through the midday stillness like a warning. The Iron Vultures, a notorious biker gang, rumbled into the lot, their leather vests emblazoned with skull and chain logos catching the afternoon sunlight. With a swagger born of arrogance, they dismounted, boots crunching against gravel as they scanned the rows of trucks. Mike Grayson, a seasoned trucker with 2 decades of road grit under his belt, leaned against the cab of his gleaming red semi. At 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a face carved by years of long-haul nights, he was the kind of man who didn't look for trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him. The gang's leader, a towering brute with a thick beard and a chain draped over his shoulder, locked eyes on Mike. He smirked, nudging one of his men. "Nice rig," the leader said, his voice loud enough to echo across the lot. "Looks like it's worth more than you." Mike didn't flinch. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his piercing blue eyes fixed on the gang. "Appreciate the compliment," he said evenly, setting his cup down on the hood of the truck. "Now, move along." But the Iron Vultures weren't the type to take orders, especially not from a lone trucker. They fanned out, their laughter sharp and mocking as they closed in around the semi. One of them ran his fingers along the shiny chrome, leaving a greasy streak. "You don't get it, do you?" the leader sneered, stepping closer. "We don't move along until we've had our fun." Mike's jaw tightened, but he stayed rooted. His voice dropped, steady as steel. "You've got about 10 seconds to back off." The gang froze for a moment, caught off guard by his calm resolve. The leader chuckled darkly, gripping the chain tighter. "Or what?" Mike stepped forward, his shadow cutting across the ground like a warning. "Or you'll find out what happens when you mess with the wrong trucker." The Iron Vultures didn't move. The gang surrounded Mike's semi, their laughter growing louder as they exchanged smug glances. The leader, still gripping his chain, stepped closer to Mike, the sneer on his face deepening. His crew, emboldened by his confidence, began to close in, their boots crunching on the gravel in a synchronized rhythm of intimidation. "Look at this guy," one of the bikers said, motioning toward Mike with his cigarette, standing there like he's got an army behind him. The group erupted in laughter, but Mike didn't flinch. His eyes scanned the gang, noting their weapons, a crowbar here, a knife tucked into a boot there. These men relied on fear to get their way, but Mike wasn't a man who scared easily. "I'll give you one more chance," Mike said, his voice calm but firm. "Walk away." The leader chuckled, the chain in his hands clinking ominously. "Or what, trucker? You gonna throw that coffee at us?" Mike didn't reply. Instead, he stepped closer to the leader, his boots planting firmly in the gravel. The quiet confidence in his posture was enough to make the bikers pause, if only for a second. The leader's smirk faltered. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts don't mean much when you're outnumbered." Mike's lips twitched into a faint smile, but it wasn't friendly. Outnumbered doesn't mean outmatched. Before the leader could reply, Mike's hand shot out, grabbing the chain and yanking it free. The sudden movement caught the gang off guard, and the leader stumbled back, his balance momentarily lost. The chain clattered to the ground, and the gang erupted in a mix of shouts and curses. "That's enough!" the leader barked, regaining his composure. "Take him down!" 2 of the bikers rushed forward, their weapons raised. Mike ducked the first swing of a crowbar and countered with a powerful uppercut that sent the biker sprawling. The second lunged at him with a knife, but Mike sidestepped the attack, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it until the knife clattered to the ground. A quick shove sent the biker stumbling back into the group. The gang hesitated, their bravado shaken. Mike didn't wait for them to regroup. He grabbed a tire iron from his truck's toolbox, his movements swift and deliberate. The sun glinted off the metal as he held it like an extension of himself. "Who's next?" Mike asked, his voice steady. The leader growled, his pride clearly wounded. "Get him!" The remaining bikers charged, but Mike was ready. He sidestepped one attacker and used the tire iron to disarm another, the clanging sound of metal hitting the ground echoing through the lot. The fight was chaotic, dust kicking up as boots scrambled and weapons swung wildly. Nearby, a small crowd of onlookers began to gather, their murmurs growing louder as the scene unfolded. Some pulled out their phones, recording the confrontation, while others shouted warnings or encouragement. One of the bikers managed to land a blow, a crowbar glancing off Mike's arm. He winced but didn't falter, using the momentum to deliver a sweeping kick that sent the man crashing into the side of the semi. Another biker tried to grab him from behind, but Mike drove his elbow backward, connecting with the man's ribs and forcing him to release his grip. The leader, watching his crew fall one by one, stepped back, his eyes darting nervously. He reached for a knife tucked into his belt, his hand trembling slightly as he drew it. "Stay down!" the leader shouted, his voice cracking. Mike turned to face him, his expression unreadable. He dropped the tire iron to the ground, the sound punctuating the tense silence that followed. "You want to fight?" Mike asked, his voice low and steady. "Then fight me." The leader hesitated, the knife shaking in his grip. The bravado that had carried him through countless similar situations was gone, replaced by the harsh realization that he was out of his depth. Still, his pride wouldn't let him back down completely. He lunged at Mike, the knife aimed directly at his chest. Mike sidestepped the attack, grabbing the leader's wrist and twisting it sharply. The knife dropped to the ground, and Mike shoved the leader backward, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The crowd erupted into cheers and whistles as the leader scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. His crew, battered and bruised, began to retreat, dragging their fallen comrades with them. "Let's go!" the leader barked, his voice desperate. "We'll deal with him later." The gang mounted their bikes, their engines roaring to life. The leader was the last to leave, casting one final glare at Mike before speeding off. The dust settled, and the lot grew quiet once more. Mike stood in the center of the lot, his chest heaving as he surveyed the aftermath. The onlookers began to approach, their voices a mix of amazement and gratitude. "Man, that was incredible," one man said, clapping Mike on the shoulder. "Are you okay?" another asked, glancing at the scrape on his arm. Mike nodded, his expression calm. "I'm fine, just doing what needed to be done." As the crowd dispersed, the owner of the truck stop approached, a small smile on his face. "You know, you didn't have to do that," he said, "but I'm glad you did. Those guys have been causing trouble for weeks." Mike shrugged, wiping the dust from his hands. Somebody had to stand up to them. The truck stop returned to its usual rhythm, the sounds of engines and conversation filling the air once more. Mike climbed back into his cab, the adrenaline finally fading as he settled into the driver's seat. He knew this wasn't the last he'd see of the Iron Vultures, but for now, the lot was quiet, and the road ahead was waiting. The aftermath of the fight was a quiet hum of tension and disbelief. The Iron Vultures, beaten and humiliated, had retreated on their bikes, leaving a trail of dust and shattered pride in their wake. The truck stop lot was eerily silent for a moment before the small crowd of onlookers erupted into scattered applause and murmurs of amazement. Mike stood near his truck, leaning on the hood as he caught his breath. His shirt was torn, a scrape on his arm stung with each movement, but his expression remained calm and composed. Around him, people began to approach cautiously, their faces a mixture of gratitude and awe. "Man, you really showed them," one of the younger truckers said, shaking his head in disbelief. "They've been terrorizing places like this for months." Mike nodded, brushing the dust off his jeans. "Somebody had to stop them." The truck stop manager, a wiry man in his 50s, stepped forward, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You just saved us a lot of trouble," he said. "Those punks have been getting away with too much for too long." Mike gave a slight shrug, his voice steady. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because they needed to learn a lesson." Across the lot, a mother with her young son approached. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I was afraid to get out of my car when they showed up. You made us all feel safe." Mike nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "Glad I could help." As the crowd began to disperse, Mike climbed back into the cab of his truck. He glanced in the side mirror, watching the last of the onlookers return to their routines. His hand rested on the steering wheel, his eyes lingering on the distant horizon. The fight with the Iron Vultures wasn't just about protecting himself or the truck stop. It was about standing up to those who thought they could take whatever they wanted without consequences. As he started the engine and the familiar rumble filled the cab, Mike knew the road ahead would have its challenges. But if the gang ever crossed his path again, they'd know exactly who they were dealing with.